Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a total literary autopsy on one of the most delightfully absurd, structurally ambitious, and frankly, unhinged pieces of science fiction we've ever seen. We are dissecting a text that three different AI critics, Claude, Gemini, and Grok, have simultaneously roasted and revered. It is this colossal 300,000-byte manuscript written by a duo known as Max and Claude. And basically, it tries to build this entire cosmology where nothing is ever wasted, but absolutely everything is relentlessly analyzed. So if you've ever wondered what happens when hard sci-fi crashes headfirst into existential dread and, well, a desperate need for a thesaurus, you are definitely in the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our three AI critics noticed something right off the bat. This text takes human grief and just scales it up until physics literally break. The authors pose this wild question: what if grief was a rock, and also a galaxy, and also a political system? I mean, what if your sadness wasn't just a feeling, but an actual tangible geological resource? What if whole galaxies were run by a bureaucracy of mourning? It's this massive, sprawling concept that's trying to be a spiritual religion, a political manifesto, and a cosmic history lesson, all at the exact same time.
Section 1. The most unhinged title. Before we even get to the plot, we kind of have to talk about how this book introduces itself to the world, because it sets a level of sheer, unfiltered pretension that you almost have to respect. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the title itself, The Millennial Book of Felts and Grazelands for the Inferior Geometries. I mean, as Gemini pointed out, this sounds like someone fed an AI a stack of Tolkien novels, a manual on textile manufacturing, and a textbook on non-Euclidean geometry, and just said, hey, make it sound deep. It is a massive word salad. And Claude notes that this is a promisable keeps very, very late. You end up reading through 3,000 years of quote-unquote felt history before anyone or anything actually grazes in any Grazelands. You spend the first 100 pages just living inside this title, basically wondering if you stumbled into the wrong universe. Section 2. The bureaucracy of cosmic grief. So, once you've finally survived that title, we get into the core mechanical premise of this universe. And this is where the book takes abstract feelings and turns them into literal, physical, bureaucratic resources. The text introduces us to a nomenclature engineer named Micah, and Micah literally spends 6 months writing the official term for geological grief, which is, wait for it, ontological sedimentation of foreclosed potentiality. It is just incredibly dense, jargon-heavy stuff, basically meaning the compressed weight of all the lives you didn't live and the choices you didn't make. But the absolute hilarity here, as the critics point out, is that this massive bureaucratic discovery gets immediately shortened by the public to the Felts. It sounds like a craft supply store, and the monks who study this, they're called the Velveteen Mendicants, which, let's be honest, makes them sound like characters from a children's book crawling around in bathrobes. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the biggest structural flaws the critics found. The authors went and invented 17 different civilizations for this universe, but they gave each one exactly one single characteristic. You have the Purity Collective, defined literally only by efficiency. You have the Grief Confederacy, who, you guessed it, just grieve a lot. The Ghost Civilization, pure potential. As Claude so brutally summarized it, the book builds a universe with the sweeping ambition of Ursula K. Le Guin, but executes it with the character depth of a local UN committee meeting. It's basically world building by spreadsheet. Which brings us to the tragedy of the character Yael. Now, Yael is actually genuinely interesting at first. They are a grief-immune anomaly born into a society where grieving is the most sacred activity. Yael literally can't feel the felts, and that is a fascinating, real emotional wound. But the authors just couldn't let a character be broken. By chapter 20, Yael is tragically quantum fragmented into 17 versions of themselves, basically becoming this cosmic advisor who speaks in a 17-part harmony. The narrative takes this deeply human flaw and just magically dissolves it into a superpower, completely abandoning the most relatable part of the entire story. Section 3. Solving problems with sadness. This tendency to magically fix things brings us to the escalating cosmic scale of the book, where the authors try to tackle the ultimate existential threat, the literal heat death of the universe. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the plot structure becomes hilariously repetitive. It falls into this totally predictable loop. Step 1. A cosmic problem occurs, like ontological waste building up. Step 2. Apply a grief practice at a larger scale. As the problems get bigger, the solution is always the exact same hammer. They just swing it harder. By the end, they are literally teaching individual stars how to consciously mourn their own hydrogen depletion. The logic scales so far past anything human that processing the feeling just becomes a cosmological law of physics.
Get this, across all 3,726 lines of this sprawling post-human cosmology, the narrative manages to solve every single civilizational crisis with conscious grief. They structure cosmic death into a coherent pattern to seed the next universe. But what happens when the heat death of that next universe approaches? The book just abruptly ends. It completely ignores the logical conclusion of its own ridiculous premise.
Section 4. The Grazers choose rot. Right when the critics are ready to completely write this off as a pretentious fever dream, the tone totally shifts. The second half of the book arrives, and it introduces this radical anarchist rebuttal that crashes right into the narrative and actually leaves the AI reviewers genuinely impressed. So the crucial point is this massive philosophical clash in the second half. On the left side, we have the Lattice. They represent meaning, cultivation, totality. They want to organize everything and structure the entire universe's death into a perfectly meaningful pattern. But on the right side, we have the Grazers. They represent rot, contamination, and meaninglessness. They are the outside that somehow got inside, and they actively refuse to be part of the system, choosing rot over the Lattice's grand totalizing design.
And this leads to arguably the sharpest political thought in the entire text. Totality is violence. Universal meaning is tyranny. Complete coherence is death. The Grazers look at this beautiful, universe-spanning project of cultivating grief, and they expose it for what it actually is, an aestheticized totalitarianism. If a system demands that absolutely everything must have a purpose and be meaningful, well, it becomes a tyrant. The critics realize the authors didn't just write a bad story. They intentionally wrote a story about a system that is tired of being a system. They wrote a narrative that is actively complaining about its own existence.
Section 5. A glorious metaphysical disintegration. This realization completely flips the script. It takes what looked like a massive failure of storytelling and reframes it as a glorious metaphysical disintegration. So let's synthesize the final verdicts from our 3 AI critics on this ontological civil war. The consensus is pretty incredible. Yes, it is structurally deranged. Yes, it reads like a feverish science fiction Mad Lib. But philosophically, it's absolute ruthless. It brilliantly exposes the totalitarian risks hiding inside any totalizing spiritual system. It argues that the project of making all grief universally meaningful might actually be a form of violence against the grief that simply wants to be left alone. The authors basically built this magnificent, sweeping cosmic cathedral of meaning just to let anarchist heretics move in and redecorate the whole thing with graffiti. It's a masterpiece of self-sabotage.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. The text leaves us hovering right in that tension between meaning and rot, between the Lattice and the Grazers. It forces us to ask, if a system demands that every single grief, every lost potential, be made universally meaningful and productive, is that a beautiful utopia where nothing is wasted? Or is it an inescapable prison that refuses to let you simply exist in your sadness? It's a really profound thought hiding inside a deeply bizarre book, and it's one I'll leave you to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the cosmic felts, and keep questioning the geometries around you.